Welcome everyone to the quest for the text, searching for the Bible's original words throughout the ages. We have the pleasure of learning this afternoon or evening with Dr. Chanan Gafni, who we've had the pleasure of learning from Adrisha several times this year. In this class, determining the original text of the Holy Scriptures, and especially that of the Pentateuch, was an essential part of biblical studies from the very start. Needless to say, this effort was not restricted to Jews, but was also widespread among Christians and Muslim scholars throughout the ages. In this series of lectures, we will learn about the various versions of the Bible. In addition, we will trace the religious battles that surround the biblical text and assess their roles in advancing critical approaches to the biblical text. Our teacher today, Dr. Gafni, studied at the Mir Yeshiva while earning his academic degrees from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Harvard University. He currently teaches at Hebrew University and Midrash Lindenbaum. And if you have questions for him over the course of class, just as a matter of housekeeping, please ask them in chat. He will get to them at various points or at the end. It's always nice to see faces. You're welcome to keep your camera on if you are in a place where you can do so. And with that, good afternoon, Dr. Gafni. It's a pleasure to learn with you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen and start the lecture. It's a great opportunity for me to escape the elections going on in Israel now and talk about some learning Torah instead. Okay, so this is the, do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this series that I call the quest for the text is going to involve, I would say, three themes that will come up, or three goals that we're trying to achieve in the course of this series. And that's the first thing I just want to address briefly, and then I'll give you a basic outline what we're about to cover in the course of this mini-series. Okay, so the way I remember this is using this 3Bs logo. So what does each one of these Bs stand for? So the first thing we're going to try to learn or discuss or enrich our knowledge involves the Bible itself. We will try to learn more about different aspects that involve the biblical texts in particular, meaning what are the different type of texts that we have nowadays? What are the different records of the Bible? So that's going to be the first theme, the first issue we're going to try to learn about. The second B, or the second theme, will be the battles over the biblical text. In the course of this mini-series, we will learn that throughout history, from the moment the Bible came down or became an important book, different groups, and essentially the main three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were all struggling, were all battling over the biblical text, each religion claiming that they have the original precise version of the Bible. So the second theme is going to be the battle over the biblical text, the battle over determining what is the accurate version of the Bible. I need to explain, this course is all about the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians would call the Old Testament. We're not going to talk here about the New Testament or about the Quran. We're talking about the battle over the biblical text, or over the authentic or original or accurate version of the Hebrew Bible. What did the original Bible say? Which community has the original version of the Bible? So again, first theme is learning about different versions of the Bible. The second theme is learning about the battles that surrounded determining this version of the Bible. And finally, the third B is something about biblical criticism. So we'll just say a few words about the idea of biblical criticism. Biblical criticism is not about criticizing the Bible, obviously, but it's when people refer to biblical criticism, they refer to the academic or scholarly way of studying the Bible. When it comes to the biblical text, scholars have a very different approach when they talk about the text. Whereas traditional people want or wish, desire to think that the original text of the Bible was kept and maintained throughout history, scholars raise all sorts of question marks or are very skeptical about the authenticity of the text. They might argue that the original text is gone, is no longer available. And what we have today is only some version of the Bible that perhaps does not present or reflect the original text as it was handed in at the very start. So the third goal, or the third theme of this class, will be to discuss the shift from traditional to critical views when it comes to the biblical text. When did people start becoming more skeptical as to the accuracy of the biblical text? When did people start raising questions? And also, can traditional people handle these question marks? Can traditional people live with these new ideas about the authenticity of the text? So we're going to talk in a sense about the Bible itself. We're going to talk a little bit about history, the history of the study of the Bible, and again, focusing on the state of the text itself. And finally, we're going to talk about a theological question, the shift from a traditional to a critical way of seeing the text, and how can traditional people handle that shift. So those are the three themes, the three B's of this class. I'm not going to divide the class based on these themes, but those are going to be the themes that are going to be in the back of our minds as we go through this journey together. Our goal, in a sense, will be to combine all these three themes together and talk about raise the questions. How did the battles surrounding the original text between traditional societies perhaps contributed or advanced the way that Bible scholars view the text? So we're going to, again, examine the connections between the Bible, the biblical text, the battles over the Bible, and the rise or the emergence of biblical criticism. So those are the topics we're going to do. And I want to give you a very basic outline how the course will be divided, more or less. Again, there are always things might change along the way, but at least this is the pattern that I had in mind when I was planning the course. So I would say this is more or less the outline. Introduction. Today we will discuss the idea of text witnesses and also textual versions of the Bible. We'll address these terms. What is a text witness and what is a textual version of the Bible? From there, we'll move on. If time allows, we'll even address this question today. We'll talk about the Jewish version of the Bible that is also known as the Masoretic text. So we will learn about the Masoretic text, facts and theories. We'll move on to the Christian version of the Bible, the Septuagint, or the version of the Bible that was being used by Christians, the Septuagint. After we will be familiar with these two competing versions, the Jewish version and the Christian version of the Bible, we will start dealing with the battles. Christians, Muslims, and Jews, battles over the Bible, or the battles that they had surrounding the authenticity or the accuracy of the biblical text. Towards the end of the series, we'll move on from the medieval period toward modern period. We'll talk about the Reformation, the discovery of the Samaritan version of the Bible, somewhere in the 16th century. And finally, entering the modern era, we'll talk about the later development in the 18th and 19th century, the emergence of biblical criticism. And all of this is about the biblical text. So these are the themes we're going to address in this mini series. Just to be fair, the logo, the BBB, is not something I made up. It's actually a logo of a hamburger chain in Israel. But I'm using this logo also for our purposes because it's about the Bible, it's about the battles, and it's about biblical criticism. Okay, so now we're ready to start. If you have questions, if it's short questions, you can feel free to ask. You can use the chat. If it's something more that demands more longer discussion, so maybe we'll keep it to the end of the class. In the course of the discussion, I might ask you to read a passage or something, so it's not all me talking for such a long time. We're a small group, and that enables us to have more of a discussion and not just a lecture type of thing. Okay, so we're going to start with the first idea or the first concept that is going to be part of our introduction, and what that is the idea of a text witness or text witnesses. This is a general term, but we're going to discuss this with regards to the Bible. Scholars distinguish between text witnesses and textual versions. What is a text witness and what is the textual version? So we're starting with text witnesses. So the question is, what is a text witness, in our case, of the Bible? Answer. When people talk about text witnesses of the Bible, they refer to a physical copy of the Bible. A text witness is a physical copy of the Bible, which can obviously shed light on the original text of the book. The earlier the text, obviously, the better. If you have a copy of the Bible that was printed a few years ago, obviously the value is not as great as if you go to the if you find an ancient copy of a few thousand years old. So obviously that one will be more valuable. So the earlier, the better. Every copy of the Bible is a text witness of the Bible. I can show you here. This is a text witness of the Bible. It's a copy of the Bible. How do we describe a text witness of the Bible? How do we describe it? Let's imagine I was walking in the desert, in the Judah desert near my house somewhere, and I found an ancient copy of the Bible, and I wanted to start writing an article about it, describing it to different scholars. What did I find? What do I have? So how do you describe a text witness of the Bible or of any other book? We are talking about a physical copy, something that we can touch and feel with our two hands, and therefore the first question that scholars will want to know are questions that are relevant for something for a physical document. So what kind of questions might ask from publishing my article? And people who want to ask me, or I will want to describe my readers, what did I find? So what questions will come up? What will be the most crucial questions that everybody will want to know when I'm putting this, writing about this discovery in a journal? Anybody wants to suggest what will be the crucial pieces of information that everybody will want to know?
I think it's important to know where it was found and the surroundings.
Excellent. So when we talk about a physical copy of the Bible, the first thing that somebody might want to know is questions that involve that physical discovery. Such questions such as, how do we describe a text witness? We will want to ask, where was it found? Where exactly did I find that copy? People might want to know, when was it written? It's not always easy to assess the precise time in history, but people probably will want to know, when was this copy put into writing? Who wrote this and when? People might want to know questions that involve the type of document that I find. What is the material that is being written on? What type of, what was I writing with? What type of ink, or how did I write it? All of these are questions that involve a physical discovery. The size, how big is the document I found? Is it 2 centimeters, or if it's a whole few meters? How big is this thing? The context, where did I find it? What was the context? Did I find it in a cave, or just thrown out, or in a house? In what format, and what was the context in which the document was found? All these are questions that involve a physical, something that we can actually sense or touch. Only then we might proceed and talk about the content. What does it say? What can we learn from the content itself? This is what people refer to as a text witness, a physical copy of the Bible. The next question I want to ask you then, having described the idea of a text witness, so the next question I want to ask you is, let's start with what is the most ancient text witness of the Bible that is known up to this moment, the 1st of November, 2022. So what is the most ancient physical copy of the Bible that we know at this moment about? Anybody knows? I'm sure some of you heard about it. What's the most ancient copy of the Bible? Any document, but a physical document.
Dead Sea Scrolls, not the whole Bible, but parts.
Okay, so Dead Sea Scrolls is a good guess, but not good enough. It's not the most ancient copy of the Bible.
The Birkat Kohanim.
Excellent. So I don't see her exactly. So I don't see who's talking, but I'm happy to hear. So let's see, Richard. Okay, so the most ancient physical copy of the Bible is, as you said, Birkat Kohanim, or the priestly blessing, and we'll say a few words about this document. This document was discovered fairly recently. It was discovered in 1986. by a professor named Gabi Barkai, professor from Hebrew University, was discovered in the Hinnom Valley. If you know Yerushalayim, it's near the Cinematheque area, right outside the walls of the old city near Mount Zion, Har Zion. It's currently in the Israel Museum, not too far from the place where it was actually discovered. In the last year or two, they're actually making the precise location where it was found into a park, and you even have an exhibit that you can see that explains a little bit more about the discovery. But the piece itself is found, or the pieces themselves are found in the Israel Museum. Date, people assume more or less 6th century BCE. So this is a few hundred years before the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're talking about 2 small bronze fragments. They look like this. It's not one, but rather 2. Very small in size. One of them is 2 centimeters by 10 or so. We're talking about a very small fragment. It was rolled up and it had to be opened. And as you said, Richard, before, it includes the priestly blessing and a few more blessing and curses that do not come from the Bible. So the priestly blessing are a few verses from the book of Numbers and a few more words in addition to that. Here you can see some attempt to write in modern Hebrew letters what it says here. A few words about the discovery. It was an interesting story, the discovery. Gabi Barkai, that professor, here you see he's sitting, he found it in a cave, or near a cave, and near a burial system. And the way it was usually done back then, when a person would die, he would put his body something like that. He would lie down for about a year, and when his body decays, they put his bones and also a few of his valuable things below the place that he's lying, somewhere around underneath the ground level, or sometimes in areas kind of in between. So these 2 small fragments were found near somebody's bones and other valuable things that he had in one of those burial systems. You see here, it's from the newspaper from the time back then. Psukei Birkat Kohanim Bichtav Ivri Atik Milifnei 2,600 Shana Nechsefu B'Yerushalayim. This is the title when they found this in Yerushalayim. Gabi Barkai, the professor, recalls in his memories how he actually discovered these 2 amazing fragments, and this is what he says in his memories. He says as follows: we were working then with a group of children as part of an archaeological club of the Society for the Environmental Protection. It's called in Hebrew. And he says one of the children was particularly annoying. He says in Hebrew, he was a nudnik. This is translated from the Hebrew. It was a big nudnik. I thought to myself, send him to one of the burial chambers where he can polish one of the stones. I assumed that the chamber was already looted like all the other in the other burial caves. But a short time later, I felt somebody pulling at my shirt. I turned around and there was the same annoying child, and in his hands were 2 fully intact First Temple artifacts. I almost strangled him. That boy led me to the greatest discovery of my life. So this kid, and under the supervision of Gabi Barkai, he was the person who found the most ancient physical copy or most ancient text witness of the Bible that is known up to this moment. What about later? What was known before 1986? So before 1986, we have to refer to 2 other important discoveries. This is, by the way, Gabi Barkai. So one of them is called the Nash Papyrus. The Nash Papyrus, again, not just one document, but a set of documents, and we'll say a few words about them. The Nash Papyruses were discovered more or less, and I'll explain why it's more or less, in 1898, published in 1903 by some professor named W.L. Nash, and that's why they're called the Nash Papyrus, somewhere in Egypt, currently in the Cambridge University Library. These documents were discovered by some anonymous person. He took it away from the place where he found it and sold them to the British professor, and that's why we don't know the precise location or the precise timing when it was found, but it made its way into the scholarly community fairly soon afterwards. It's dated. There were a lot of debates when to date this. Initially, they thought it should be dated later, but eventually scholars decided that it belongs to the 2nd century BCE. So it's a few hundred years later than the priestly blessing that we've spoken about. We're talking about 4 fragments that include essentially the 10 commandments and also Parashat Shema. This is not on bronze, it's papyrus. It's some sort of plant that goes through a whole process. And this was before 1986 for many, many decades. That was considered the most ancient ancient copy of the Hebrew Bible, the most ancient text witness of the Bible. And finally, so one of you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, so obviously we need also to address that. In 1948 until the 1960s, in the Dead Sea, in the northern part of the Dead Sea, western bound of the Dead Sea, near where Kibbutz Kalya is in the northern part, a set of caves were found, about 11 caves. And in those caves also many, many fragments of the Bible were found. In addition to other types of books, we're not going to address them now. Here we're talking about hundreds of fragments that cover the entire Bible, or at least represent the entire Bible, with the acceptance of the book of Esther. Megillat Esther was not found in Qumran, is not part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. At the same time, some other books, we have even more than one document. Here you see, we're not going to tell the whole story. It's a fascinating tale, but I'm sure you read about it. Here you see, this is in the Rockefeller Museum in Eastern Yerushalayim, and this is how they're opening the scrolls in the 1960s and later on, trying to read and decipher what the scrolls say. The scrolls are found today in the Israel Museum, with the acceptance of one scroll that is in Jordan now. As I said, in the Dead Sea Scrolls include many, many passages from the entire Bible. Here is just one example, a few verses from the book of Psalms. Does anybody want to try reading it? Can you tell me which chapter it is? Those of you who read Tehillim, maybe. Can you read these words? Can you read these letters? Anyone who wants to dare? The first line. Can you recognize the script? Can you recognize the letters?
I see it starts with Ner Ragli, but I have no idea where that is.
Okay, good. So you're in the right, oh, I'm sorry. You're in the right track. This is Tehillim Kuf Yutet 119. Ner leragli dvarecha or lintivati nishbati va'akayema la'asot mishpat tzidkecha. Just like what we have today in our Bibles. Just point out one fascinating fact. You see that in the, let's say, we'll take this verse, what we say before the blowing of the shofar. Nidvot piretzeh, and here it says God's name. Umishpatecha lamdeini. Everything is written in the current script that we use nowadays with the acceptance of God's name. God's names is still being written with the more ancient form of the alphabet, not the current Assyrian script that we use nowadays. We'll talk about it later, but somewhat an earlier format or only a version of the alphabet. Why do you suppose people did not write God's names in the same type of script, the same type of Assyrian script as the rest of the document itself? What could be the causes for that? Just suggest if you have any ideas. Why not write God's name here and also here? Why use the more ancient format of the alphabet rather than the one that was the prevailing one during that time, the Assyrian alphabet?
To be
Ideas? Yeah.
more
What do you
traditional,
say?
to be more traditional. If that's how Hashem's name was written in even to them ancient times, they did not change his name.
Okay, so one way of viewing it is that way and saying perhaps that was considered or perceived the more authentic way of writing God's name. And that's why people preferred writing it. Just like when people, even nowadays, sometimes when people in a different realm, sometimes people also pronounce God's name in a different way that they pronounce the rest of the words. You ever saw people who read everything in Havara Sfaradit, but when it comes to God's name, they still use Havara Ashkenazit. They say Adonai rather than Adonai. Because they feel this is perhaps the more authentic way of reading God's name. So maybe it's a similar phenomenon. They're writing God's name in what they thought is more original. That's one way of
God's
doing
name,
it.
if God's name is not supposed to be spoken, then perhaps writing it in a more ancient script would sort of announce that to the reader of these psukim.
Okay, great. So the other option, rather than saying it's a way of trying to keep God's name in the more authentic way, another option would be precisely the opposite. Just like today, people don't write God's name, but sometimes they write the letter Hashem, Hey, or Dalet, because they want to avoid using the authorized or official way of writing God's name. Perhaps that was the same story with the scroll. They used the non-formal or non-accepted type of script because they did not want to use the real or the official authoritative way of writing God's name. Not because it's more holy, but perhaps because it's less holy or not considered as divine. These are two possibilities. In either way, this is just one sample of a textual witness from Qumran, from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is a little bit getting a sense of what are text witnesses and a few words about the most ancient text witnesses that exist on this planet until this moment. Now we're moving a step forward. What is a textual version of the Bible? A textual version is a different concept or a different term, a term that is supposed to mark something different than a text witness. So what is a textual version? Here. What is a textual version of the Bible? We have many text witnesses of the Bible all over the world. Many text witnesses of the Bible. When one detects, when we find a group of text witnesses of the Bible that share the same features, and that we can say that they form, in a sense, a branch or a family of biblical texts, right? So just imagine we have all these text witnesses, and many of them resemble each other in all sorts of ways, in different features. They share similar characteristics. So we can talk about a family of text witnesses or a textual version of the Bible. A textual version of the Bible is not a physical copy. It's an abstract concept. It's a family of text witnesses that share the same features. When we talk about a textual version of the Bible, we're not going to talk about the date or location where this particular piece was found, because we're not talking about a particular document. We're talking about an abstract idea about this family or about this type of version of the Bible. And the questions that scholar will ask will not be questions that involve a physical discovery, but rather abstract questions. People might ask us the following questions. How do we describe the textual version? We can ask questions such as, what is the scope of this textual version of the Bible? Meaning, how many books are included in this version of the Bible? What's the order of the book and how are they divided? Are they divided into groups, or it's just the one long list of names of volumes? Do we know of any division or order of those books that are part of that version of the Bible? In what language are they written? Different versions of the Bible might be written in different languages. What script is being used in that family? What type of script for the alphabetic letters, or if it's in a different language, so obviously we're not going to talk about Hebrew letters, but what script is being used? How do we know, according to this version, how to pronounce the words? The script involves the letters themselves, but how do we know how to pronounce the words? The syntax of the sentence, how do we know about to determine the syntax of the sentence? What's unique about the syntax of the sentence in this textual version? And content itself. Different textual versions of the Bible might have different words, different formulations of similar texts. So it's not just about technical issues, but it also involves the content itself. Only then we might proceed and talk about the origin of this textual version. Which community was using that textual version? What region, in what region was it being used? When was it more or less, when did it evolve more or less? But again, we're not talking about a particular document, a physical copy of the Bible. We're talking about this general abstract notion of a version of the Bible. We can also ask, what are the most, or what is the most ancient text witness of this version? Meaning, what's the most important or ancient physical copy that belongs to that family? So these two questions come up together. What is the text witness of this version that is considered the most important or most authoritative copy? This is a little bit about two important concepts: text witnesses, physical copies, and textual versions, something more abstract. I need to emphasize that even when we're talking about a textual version of the Bible, it doesn't mean that all the copies or all the text witnesses that belong to that family are necessarily identical. I'll give you an example. I have a nice family. I have a wife and 4 kids. Me and my kids don't look exactly the same, right? We're in the same family. We're not copies of each other. But when somebody comes from the outside and he sees my son, he says, "Oh, he looks just like you." He's not identical to me, but it's clear that he's part of that family. And this is, in a sense, what is true also with regards to copies of the Bible. Not all copies within a textual version need to be identical, but they can still form a family because they share the same basic features. They're different enough than other versions of the Bible that we can view them as a family. It doesn't mean that all copies of the Bible in this version, in this textual version, are 100% identical. There might be minor gaps even within the family. So this is the first part of our introduction: text witnesses and textual versions of the Bible. And now we're going to proceed one step further and start talking about a particular version of the Bible, a particular textual version of the Bible that is supposed to be familiar to all of us. We're going to talk about the Jewish version of the Bible that is also has a name or a title. It's called the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is I would say, the most authoritative or official version of the Bible among the Jews. So we will try now, till the end of today's meeting, to talk about this version of the Bible and talk about its textual witnesses. Okay, so the questions we will address soon is, what is the authorized version of the Bible within the Jewish community? We'll talk about some facts. What are the features of this Jewish version of the Bible? What are its most important text witnesses? And if time allows, we'll address briefly something more theoretical. What did Jews think about their version of the Bible in antiquity? Did they assume in ancient times that it was absolutely authentic? Or did they have some thoughts about or consider the possibilities that it's not 100% perfect? So these are the questions we will address from now until the end of today's session. Any questions before we move on? Okay. So we're starting with the first aspect. We spoke about the title. We said the official authorized version of the Bible among Jews is called the Masoretic text. Sometimes scholars use the abbreviated form MT, Masoretic text. It's not enough to say Tanakh or Bible. Bible is the same for every, it's just a general name. It doesn't convey the particular version that we're talking about among Jews. If you want to talk about and be more precise, sound like a scholar talking about the precise version of the Bible that is used among Jews, so you refer to the Masoretic text. Why is this text called the Masoretic text? The Masoretic text is named after a group of sages called the Masoretic sages, who lived in the 8th, 9th, and maybe also into the 10th century, and were very involved in establishing and documenting the Jewish version of the Bible. So there was a group of sages in Palestine and in Babylon who were very much invested in describing and maintaining the precise version of the Jewish Bible. These people were called the Masoretic text, the sages, and the text, the Jewish version of the Bible from then on is called the Masoretic text. So if somebody asks you, what is the textual version of the Bible that is being used among Jews for centuries, you'll say the Masoretic version of the Bible, or the Masoretic text. What are the features or characteristics of the Jewish version of the Bible, of the Masoretic text? So we'll address many aspects that you're all familiar with, but it will be also, it's useful first to spend a moment and think about these different features, And also it's important because it's going to be different than competing versions of the Bible. So in order to appreciate or sense the differences between our version of the Bible and other versions of the Bible, we need to be familiar with all these features. So what are the features of the Bible? Of the Hebrew, not of the Bible, of the Masoretic text of the Bible. We'll start with the scope. How many books does the Bible have in our Bibles, the Jewish versions of the Bible? How many books does it include? What's the number of books that we have?
24?
We have 24 books. That's the common way we count them. And they're divided into 3 categories: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ktuvim. Here I copied this from the web, and then I saw that they skipped the numbers here in the first part. It's not me. I remember Torah, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Dvarim. You see even here they put the number 5, but they missed Bamidbar. Our versions of the Bible, the Masoretic text in its current form, is divided into 3 categories: Torah, Nevi'im, Ktuvim, or law, prophets, and writings. This 3 category version of the Bible is actually something that did not exist from the very beginning. It seems like initially there were only 2 sections: Torah and everything else. At some point, then the remaining part of the Bible, the remaining part was split into prophets and writing, Nevi'im and Ktuvim. I would also mention that the distinction or the criteria for distinguishing between the prophets and the writings is not so clear-cut. It's not a chronological criteria, but it's also not a genre issue. So what exactly divides between the prophets and the writings? How was each book classified between these two is a matter of debate, and we will not address that. But the current versions of the Bible include, in the Masoretic version, Masoretic text version, has 3 parts: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ktuvim. The order of the book is also not so obvious. It's not a chronological order within each one of these sections. Some books go out of their order. For example, the book of Trei Asar includes many books. It's located somewhere as part of the prophets, but the order of the books are not chronological. Some of the 12 of the Trei Asar might come before Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Yechezkel, before these books, and some of them are after. So it's not just a chronological order, and we will not say much more beyond that. So these are the basic features of the scope of the Masoretic text when it comes to scope, division, and order. I'm emphasizing this because other versions of the Bible will have a different number of books, a different division, or also a different order or sequence for the books within the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. We're proceeding on to the next aspect, and that involves language, script, pronunciation, and syntax. So in what language is the Masoretic text presented? So I know you know the answer. And what's the language of the Masoretic text, of the Jewish version of the Bible? In what language is it written? What is the language of our versions of the Bible that we use?
Hebrew.
Mostly Hebrew, some Aramaic.
So most Hebrew and some Aramaic, right? But I want you to, when you answer this question, I think it's important to emphasize one more thing. Not just what language it's written in, but to emphasize the Jewish version of the Bible, the Masoretic text, is being used in its original language. Some textual versions are only presented in a form of translation. However, the Masoretic text, the Jewish version of the Bible that is being used nowadays by Jewish community, among most Jews, is a version of the Bible that still presents the Bible in its original language, which, as you said, is mostly Hebrew, and a small minority of books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, might have some parts of Aramaic. So this is when it comes to the language. However, when we talk about the script, so here we should point out that the Masoretic text, or the Masoretic version of the Bible in its current form, is not presenting the original form of the alphabet. At least the way scholars would view this, they would say as follows: there was some ancient form of the characters of the same alphabet letters, the same 22 letters, but they were written in a different format at an earlier stage in history. The Masoretic text nowadays is using The Assyrian script, in Hebrew, it's called Ktav Ashuri. It's a type of script or a type of way of writing format of the alphabet that was adopted later on in Jewish history. So when it comes to the language, the Masoretic text keeps the Bible in its original language, but the script is not the original type of alphabet that was used earlier on in history. When we saw the Birkat Kohanim bronze fragment, so you saw that it was written in a different type of script. So earlier versions of the Bible probably were using a different fonts for the alphabet. Nowadays, we use the Assyrian version of the alphabet, which is not the original alphabet. What about we'll say a few words about the pronunciation and of the syntax. In Torah scrolls, this is what it would look like, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. How do we know how to pronounce the words? We spoke about the letters, the consonants, but what about the pronunciation? How do we know how to pronounce the words of the Bible? Let's say in the first word, I can read this word, bara ashayata, and I could read it, biri ishiyutu, or buru ushiyati. How do I know how to pronounce the word? I know you know the answer, but we're gonna say a few words about this, but how do we know how to pronounce the words?
Isn't that also part of what the Masoretic sages did back in the 8th century?
Okay, good. So what did they exactly do? So now we'll try to say it in a precise way. In books, not in a Torah scroll that is being used in a liturgical context, but in books such as this book, so you also have vowels, what we call in Hebrew the nikud. The nikud helps us know how to sound out the words. So if I look at the word here, I can tell that it sounds bereshit. As you said, the Masoretic sages came up with a great invention. They came up with this invention in the 8th century, this invention that you can write all sorts of marks below and above the letters. There were different systems of vowels that help us know how to pronounce the words. So the opening word of the Torah is now pronounced as Bereshit. However, we need to be a little bit more exact when we talk about this invention. The Masoretic sages invented the Nikud and the Ta'amim, but they did not invent the pronunciation tradition. Before these people came up with this amazing invention of the vowels and accents, it was not just chaos. The people came to the shul and just decided on their own how they want to say the word Bereshit. That one person would say one way and another person would say it differently. There was a tradition. People knew how the words are supposed to sound. In most cases, it was probably known. You can just tell by the context, just like when you read a newspaper in Israel and without vowels, and you can still know what the words are supposed to sound because these words that you're familiar with, and through the context, you know what they're supposed to sound. But even if there was a matter of doubt, people probably had a tradition and they knew how the words are supposed to sound. So what exactly did these Masoretic sages do? They didn't invent the pronunciation tradition. What they invented is a visual way that we can see how the words is being pronounced visually. We don't have to hear somebody say the word Bereshit for us to know that this is the way the word sounds. We just look at the set of vowels and we know, oh, it's supposed to sound Bereshit. Even if if I have a 6-year-old daughter who's going to Gita Aleph and she learned the vowels, so she can tell even without having visited shul once in her life, she knows that this word is supposed to sound Bereshit. So it's a visual invention, a visual representation of the sounds. It's not an invention how to sound the words. The pronunciation tradition existed way before. Maybe in marginal cases, they also had some impact on words that were under debate. But overall, they just recorded in a visual way how the words are supposed to sound. The same is true when it comes to the syntax of the sentence. How do we know how to break a sentence into parts? So in modern languages, we use commas and we have periods. We even have very sophisticated signs like quotation marks or exclamation mark, all sorts of marks. In the Bible, we don't have something that corresponds exactly to modern systems. But we do have a very detailed hierarchy of stopping points or words that are supposed to be read in one flow, and that is the accents, the te'amei hamikra. So when you have the te'amim here, you see the line below the word aleph is sof pasuk. That indicates this is the place where the most important or dramatic stopping point in the verse. A less important stopping point would be the etnachta and so on. And again, the Masoretic sages are the ones who came up with this visual presentation of how one is supposed to break the verse into parts. They did not invent the syntax of the verses, but they gave it a visual representation that helps a person know where he's supposed to read and what he's supposed to read in one flow and when he's supposed to stop. All of this is part of the Masoretic version of the Bible. So if it's a tradition that includes the consonants, the way that they're supposed to be pronounced, and the syntax. At a later stage in history, they were also presented in a visual manner. Here you see the whole list of the simanim, the signs of the nikud and the accents, and here you see a fairly ancient manuscript that you have here with all the dots and periods and dots and accents, and also some of the Masoretic comments about the spelling of the words. All this is part of the Masoretic version of the Bible. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the origin of this system. So overall, one could say we can talk about two stages. We can talk about the Masoretic text or the formation of the Masoretic text more or less in the beginning of Common Era. In other words, starting from the 1st, 2nd century and onwards, Jews probably had Bibles that are more or less similar to the Bibles that we have nowadays, among Jews at least. In a later stage, in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century, belongs to the time of the Masoretic sages, and they didn't make or form the Masoretic version of the Bible, but they documented it. They gave all these signs that now help us maintain the same way of pronunciation. There is no room for mistakes because it has all the vowels and accents. They also gave or wrote books with set of rules how to write books. If the word appears in numerous places, an identical word appears in numerous places in the Bible, they will say you're supposed to write it in a full manner with the vavs 3 times and without 2 other times. So they gave instructions to make sure that the text is kept as accurate as possible. But again, this is just a documentation program or idea, but it's not about forming the Masoretic text. The text itself was formed many, many centuries before that time. Finally, the next thing we want to talk about in the remaining minutes that we have, the text witness of the Masoretic version of the Bible, of the Masoretic text. What is the most important or crucial, or I would say ancient, important, authoritative text witness of the Masoretic version of the Bible? If I'm looking for a text witness, I'm asking, what is the most important physical copy that reflects this version of the Bible? The priestly blessing that we mentioned, or the Qumran scrolls, they're not Masoretic texts. They're different than the Masoretic text in many, many ways. I don't need to talk about these 2 bronze fragments. They're very small, but they're very different in their spelling and in the type of script they use. They can't be classified as Masoretic text. But even the Dead Sea Scrolls are not identical to what we would call the Masoretic text that we use nowadays. Maybe in some ways it paves the way towards the formation of the Masoretic text, but it's not identical. The Dead Sea Scrolls themselves are not identical. So what is the most important physical copy, text witness of the Masoretic text?
Is
I'm
that
looking to
the
what?
the Aleppo Codex?
Excellent, good. The Aleppo Codex is the most important physical copy or text witness of the Masoretic text, composed more or less, or written more or less 930 by a sofer whose name was Shlomo ben Boya, the person who put the vowels and accents and also corrected the spelling of the words, and every now and then was called Aharon ben Asher. and he put into writing a copy of the Masoretic text that is considered the most important text witness of the Masoretic version of the Bible. I'm sure you know, but I'll just remind you briefly of the history of this version of the Bible, of this text witness of the Bible. It starts its way in the city of Tiberias, where it was written, travels to Yerushalayim, to Cairo, and then moving all the way back to Syria, to the city of Aleppo. In Hebrew, it's called Aram Tzova or Chaleb. It doesn't exist today. The city was totally bombed. And 1948, when the state of Israel was founded, there was a need to get this copy out of Syria. It was smuggled somehow to Istanbul and eventually back to Yerushalayim. Happy story? Well, it's not a happy story. It's a very sad story, because by the time it came to Yerushalayim, or a little bit afterwards, half of the book was gone. About half the book is gone, and the whole part of the Torah is no longer available. What happened to this part? Well, it depends who you ask. People used to say that it was burned. In the last 20 years, more and more people are starting to speculate that it was actually stolen or taken by somebody after it came to Israel. And the part of the Torah, in any event, is not found until this moment. But that was the most important text witness of the Masoretic text. It was such an important copy that even Maimonides probably used this particular physical copy of the Masoretic text when he was writing his Mishneh Torah. He refers to a copy of the Bible the scholars today claim was this particular copy of the Bible. So I want to ask you a question. If we only have a copy of the Bible that comes from the 10th century, from the year 930, so how do we know that the Masoretic version of the Bible was the same 800 years before? If we don't have a physical copy of that version of the Bible, how do we know that this is indeed the same type of Bible that Jews were using for centuries before? How can we tell? We don't have a physical copy that comes from an earlier period. How can we tell that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael were using the same Bible that we're using today? So I'll give you some help.
Well, there's evidence both for and against. I mean, if you look at biblical quotations in the Talmud or in the Mishnah, so some are the same and sometimes they're different. If there are lots of bits and pieces that indicate that they had roughly the same text and that not precisely the same text.
Right. So we can sometimes scholars distinguish between direct text witnesses and indirect text witnesses. A direct text witness is a copy of the Bible that we don't have, but indirect evidence we have essentially from rabbinic literature. Rabbinic literature, I would say 99% is similar to the Bibles that we have nowadays, both in terms of the way that the books are divided in Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which books are included in the canon and which books were left out. All of this is more or less what we have today. Even the formulation of the verses is almost identical. But as you were saying, Richard, sometimes it's not the same. Here and there are different scholars who collected all these verses. They found verses where the rabbis have that are formulated slightly different. Does that mean that the rabbis were not working with the Masoretic text? The answer is no. They're still working with the Masoretic text. Because I said before, we're talking about a family of texts that share the same features and are almost the same. The rabbinic texts are almost identical to what we have nowadays, but they don't have to be 100% identical. They still would belong to the same family of texts. The last thing I want to address here, and we really have a very short time to talk about it, is address briefly some of the thoughts that Jews had with regards to this text. Were Jews in the ancient times sure or certain about the authenticity or accuracy of their versions of the Bible, or did they ever have doubts? So I want to bring here very briefly 3 passages from Chazal, from rabbinic literature, to say something about this. We'll start by making one thing clear. It's we can be very sure or certain that in ancient times, Jews were very careful when they were transmitting the Bible. We shouldn't think it was just a chaos environment that people just copied whatever they want. People were very, very careful when copying and making copies of the Bible. And I'm just giving you one quote that sends this, that gives this impression. In Talmud Bavli Masechet Sotah, the person is talking with the scribe. This is Rabbi Ishmael speaking to Rabbi Meir, who was a scribe, and he tells him, "My son, be careful in your work, as your work is the work of heaven, lest you omit a single letter from the Torah scroll or add a single letter, and in this you are found to be destroying the entire world." So it's very clear. People took this business very seriously. It was not just chaos. It was not something that people did without being careful while they're copying the Bible. Nevertheless, there are some indications that rabbis were willing to speak openly about some doubts that they have, whether due to things that were forgotten, meaning things that belong more to the realm of mistakes, but even maybe admitting some deliberate changes that were done in the copies of their Bibles. I'm just giving you two sources. Again, it's a much bigger story, but we're just going to raise this briefly. In Babylonian Talmud Masechet Kiddushin 30a, they talk about the word gachon that appears in Leviticus 11:32. There's a big vav there. The vav is expounded, but the Talmud over there says that the letter vav in the word gachon marks the middle letter of the Torah. And one of the chachamim, one of the sages, is asking, does it belong to the first half or the second half? They're assuming that it's an even number of letters, and they're asking, would the letter vav be the first part or the second part of the Torah? And one of the students is asking, why not just bring a Torah scroll and start counting the letters and find out, right? The sages said to him, let us bring a Torah scroll and count the letters. Rav Yosef says to them, back then, they were experts in the deficient and plain forms of the words, and therefore they could count the letters precisely. We're not experts in this regard. Meaning, the rabbis here are confessing something admitting something very dramatic. We're not 100% sure about the precise formulation of the Torah that we have, at least when it comes to ktiv maleh, ktiv chaser, deficient versus full form of words. This is a very daring statement. Perhaps even more daring is the fact that the rabbis seem to say that some text might have changed deliberately. And I want to bring us one last verse, and this is the last slide of this presentation, and then we'll briefly summarize. Talking about the Genesis 18:22, Ve'avraham odenu omed lifnei Hashem, Abraham stood yet before the Lord. The Midrash, and it has many parallels in other places, says as follows. According to Rabbi Simon, the latter words have been, out of reverence, been modified by the scribes. In Hebrew, it reads, Tikkun Sofrim. For in truth, it was the Lord's presence which stood and waited for Abraham. It's missing the M. I made a mistake too. So what are the rabbis suggesting? What was the original formulation of this verse, according to the rabbis? We have Avraham, Odenu Omed Lifnei Hashem. Abraham stood yet before the Lord. What are the rabbis suggesting here? Initially, it might have said what? What was the original formulation?
Hashem omed lifnei Abraham.
Exactly. It said, Hashem omed lifnei Avraham. God is waiting for Hashem. However, it sounded too radical. What, God is waiting for a human being? So the scribes say the order must have been changed. And eventually it says, it was changed to Avraham odenu omed lifnei Hashem. The rabbis are very open about this. And this is going to be the starting point of our later discussions about the way that Jews treated their versions of the Bible. Obviously, these are just 3 quotes, but they give us already some sense. So I want to summarize what we've seen today. That's the last slide. I'm giving 30 seconds just to summarize. What have we seen today? The first thing we learned about is text witnesses, physical copies, and textual versions of the Bible. An abstract idea, a family of texts that share the same features. We asked, how do you describe each one of these versions of the Bible? A text witness and a textual version. Then we proceeded and we spoke about the Jewish version of the Bible, what that is called the Masoretic text. We spoke about its title, its name, where did it get its name from. We spoke about its features. They're obvious to us, but when we will talk about alternative versions, we will see that none of this is obvious. There are other copies of the Bible, other versions of the Bible that have different features. And also we spoke a little bit about its most important text witness, the Aleppo Codex, but also about rabbinic literature that can serve as an indirect text witness. And finally, we spend a half a minute talking about some theological ideas, what the rabbis think about their text. And we saw that the rabbis were fairly liberal in a way, I could say, because they were willing to admit here and there that they have some doubts, at least with regards to full and defective words, but also they might have considered some changes that took place, some deliberate changes that took place throughout history. This is all for today, and I hope that next week we'll move on to the Christian version of the Bible, and once we have Jews and Christians, you can just imagine that we're going to reach the battles. But next week it's still mostly about the Christian version of the Bible, of the Septuagint, and that would lead towards those battles. Done.
All right.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to give like a few more minutes for questions if people have. And if people don't have questions, thank you, everyone. And it looks like there'll be an exciting continuation of this class next week. I hope to see as many of you there. If you are interested in learning more with Risha, this falls on our next class coming up tonight at 8 p.m. with Rabbinite Sarah Wolkenfeld is called Angels Among Us. You can find out about this and other Fallsman classes at drisha.org/classes.